Excellent. Excellent. Well, let me extend this out a little bit. I asked a personal question about you coming to faith in Jesus. I want to ask you a personal question about your professional life as an officer. You know, during this summer and even into this early fall, there are a number of protests that have broken out in various cities regarding the felt need for police reform. And so, as somebody who was a former cop, is a cop, how do you think about these things? How would you encourage all of us as believers to kind of process through all this call for police reform?
It's a great question. As a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to do an NRB TV show on that today. And I've done some video on this online in a series called Bridging the Thin Blue Line. It's on our YouTube page. But you know, there's a lot to say about this, and there's a lot to think about as a police officer engaged in these issues on a daily basis. Here's what I would say that's probably controversial. But if you think about it, something can be two things at once. Something can be controversial, yet also be true. It turns out that the law enforcement, as we think of it broadly, is the one essential, necessary profession upon which every other profession is contingent. In other words, you have to have order in place before you can safely have any other kind of profession, even medicine. If a doctor doesn't feel as though he can safely operate in a city without being robbed by the very next patient who comes in, then you won't have doctors establishing businesses in cities. So it turns out that issue, the issue of safety first, order first, is foundational. And then upon that, you can build all kinds of other professions. That's why in every county in California, we were founded in 1860, and you'll see that there were a number of counties that appeared immediately as soon as the statehood of California was established. And if you go to those counties and you look at their law enforcement, you know, if it's sheriff, if it's municipality, whatever it may be, usually it's county sheriffs. If you look at county sheriffs, you'll see that the founding date for all county sheriffs is also 1860. Well, why? Because the first thing you do in a county is you establish order. And if you don't establish it, by the way, if you remove it, some order will fill, some law enforcement body will fill the force, will fill the space that is left over from removing whatever you do. So when I hear that efforts to defund the police, now look, what I would say about a foundational service like law and order, like law enforcement, it means that this is something that people take for granted. This is the foundation upon which you build the house. And let's face it, to pay attention to your foundation? No, you don't pay attention. You walk on it every day. The dog, pees on it. I mean, it's like the foundations are meant to be spit on. Nobody cares about foundations until they're starting to crack. And then everyone starts to pay attention. Now, what I would say is the fact that law enforcement is the one necessary profession does not mean that whatever you might have in your county must stay the way it is. As a matter of fact, I tell officers this all the time: because you happen to be a member of the one necessary profession, you have a duty to a highest possible bar. No one will notice that foundation if you're doing your job right, because that's what foundations do when they do their job right. They go unnoticed. And so you have to be the kind of person who doesn't see yourself at the top of the house. You're not on the roof peaks. You're at the foundation of the house. If you're not comfortable with that position, and if you're not comfortable holding the highest possible moral standard, upon a good foundation, a good house can be built. Upon a poor foundation, a house will fall. So we have to make sure that we understand when we enter this profession that we have the highest bar of any profession because we are the one necessary profession. And you can talk about removing it, but that, to be honest, every system in place, regardless of any history of any system in the history of systems and the history of governments, all stood upon the moral character of their law enforcement body. And so at some point, you're going to enforce order, and you're either going to do it as a dictator, as a tyrant, or as a benevolent servant. You're going to do it in one way or the other. And it turns out that the Christian worldview is really the solution for a lot of this, because under a Christian worldview, I know what my leadership must be. In any role, it's going to be servant leadership, because that's the leadership that was modeled by Jesus. And I also know how I'm going to treat other people, because under the Christian worldview, there is no distinction. And what most of the moral law does in the New Testament is it battles our inclination toward what I call otherism. And otherism is the thing that divides us from everyone, because we're so prideful that we like us and people who are like us. And we reject people who are different than us. And this happens in every single group, regardless of race, ethnicity, or where you are in history. You see this within groups. If you are living on one side of town or the other, or if you're living on one side of a border in Europe as opposed to the other, and that border has only been in place since World War II, and you were the same people group before that, well, now you're dividing over that line in the dirt. I see the same thing happen in Los Angeles County when I worked gangs for 2 years. People who were actually the same family, cousins, divided by a line which separated Crips from Bloods. So we will find a way to divide from each other if it's not racism, if we were all the same race, all the same sex, all the same height, all the same physical appearance, we'd still find a way to divide from each other because our inclination is toward this form of otherism. As a matter of fact, in that video series I did online, I talk about all the studies that have been done that confirm our predisposition toward people we like who are similar to us. We are drawn toward people who are similar to us. And you might say, well, opposites attract. Well, no, it's like a quarter. There are two sides to the quarter, but both are quarters. And we find people who are like us and might have some small difference, but they're still part of that same identity. We do that far more often than we seek people who are different than us. And that is, I think, honestly, what so much of what Jesus is teaching addresses is, how do I embrace people who are different than me? You get no credit, according to Jesus, for loving those who love you. And this is true. And so that's really, I think, why the Christian worldview is the solution for all that we're seeing right now. But it seems to be the one thing that nobody wants to talk about in our culture.